Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of Found Friday. This week, we kick off our four-part series on strategic content and SEO audits. This is our 2019 Marketer's Guide, and we're really excited about taking a look at what types of audits there really are, how they can be beneficial to you, and exploring things like timeline, anticipated deliverables, who might be able to help you do your audit, and what to do once you've actually got that and put it into practice. So today we're really going to cover kind of the SEO Audit 101 portion of this. And what we're looking at today is why audits are actually valuable for your business. And I think sometimes, we've got maybe a few preconceived notions about what audits can actually do for us, but there's actually a lot of different types of business value there. We're also going to cover what types of audits there are and how they're different. There's actually several kinds of audits, and we're going to explore a number of those and talk a little bit about different instances where you might want to use different ones. And the last thing we'll touch on is how long audits might take, which can sometimes help you determine which one is right for you or how frequently you should be doing them. Kind of then what we'll talk about during our next week's show is what deliverables you should actually expect from each type of audit. So once we've covered the types of audit this week, what we'll do next week is actually explore the different deliverable types and what you may see. And what those deliverables actually look like. So sometimes those things come as, kind of a list from an SEO tool. They may come as a PDF or a presentation from an agency. They may actually be implemented directly onto your site, depending on if you're asking for kind of a full service suite like that. So we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. On our third show, we're going to talk about how to really get started. So how frequently you should actually be conducting different types of audits based on your needs, who should actually do the audit itself, and then who can actually help you execute on the deliverables from the audit. And obviously, again, that's broken down by things like your team type and size, capabilities that you have, whether you're part of a web team or a marketing team or a content team, and who owns those different aspects of your deliverables, or if you're hiring an agency or contractors to help you put some of those practices into place. We'll talk about a lot of those different options. And then on our fourth show, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of recap and talk a little bit about the goals that you should be discussing getting from your audit and tracking the KPIs after you've actually been through an audit process. We'll review the audit types and timelines and some deliverable expectations and how to tie those back into the KPIs that we've discussed. So let's kick it off with the business value of your site audits. There's actually a lot of different values, and we're going to kind of jump into a few of these specifically, but I want to talk about some of the top goals that we see. The first is the most obvious, right? Like, why aren't you as findable as you'd like, either broadly speaking or for specific topics, specific brands, products, keywords, terms, things that you might be really interested in. Another thing that an audit is great for is providing you a to-do list of tasks to improve your traffic. You can actually spot errors and issues before they impact your traffic conversions and revenue if you're doing audits on kind of a more regular schedule. We're going to talk a little bit about a lot of these as we dive into things. So again, let's set the stage for what this looks like. We also want to prioritize our tasks. We know what to tackle first. And we also really want to understand the interdependencies of how these different elements may impact each other. So why you would want to make changes in a particular order or make updates to your site or structure or content in a specific order, and how that will impact other elements from the audit list. You also can analyze your rank and performance versus your competitors, so helps you get like a little bit of an overview of what the market really looks like, depending on what kind of audit you're doing. Audits can also help you spot new competitors and competitor trends. Again, this is dependent on the types of audits you're doing, but a lot of times audits can help you get out ahead of some of these trends and changes. They're also going to help you discover optimization opportunities, ideally, right? So we're going to look at why do certain types of content perform better than others, or where can we actually take existing content that we have and make a little bit more of it, or how has our market shifted and how should we be shifting our content in order to meet that current market as opposed to our market, 2, 3, 4 years ago. We also want to uncover content opportunities and keywords to target. This is where we would talk about something like using our audit to help build an editorial calendar, or to impact our content editorial calendar, which can also be a really great benefit of doing your audits. And the last is to do the thing that helps us rank, right? Which is to provide our users the very best experience when interacting with our brand, um, and build our brand reputation and authority in the process. So let's first talk about insight into why you're not as findable. And I want to tackle this from the kind of quick aspect of like what really is findability. Because when we talk about site audits, I think we always expect this nitty gritty thing, and we are going to get into the more technical details and the nitty gritty of a lot of these elements. But we want to talk about, first of all, how findability is really impacted. So findability is the ability for a person to access the products, services, and information that they want or need, right, at its most basic level. So you can see from our example here that, it's anything from wanting new clothes, considering proposing, trying to plan a trip, trying to find a good doctor, looking for the nearest coffee shop, right? Any type of need, whether it's a good, a service, or information. Findability has really been a part of our human experience from the very beginning. And we're programmed to look for things in a certain way, and our technology has evolved to mimic our natural search style. But conversely, we've actually evolved to search more effectively as our technology has sort of trained us on the best ways to look for things. So as these evolutions have happened in tandem, um, we're using still a lot of the very same types of ways that we would have looked for things initially, and we're just looking for them in different ways. So that kind of leads us to what today's findability looks like. The two things that we have that change the most frequently are how we're found and what our audience finds. So how we're found includes things like channels such as search, social, email, forums, word of mouth, etc. And then what our audience finds is comprised of the actual types of content that they found, like universal search elements that are now part of the actual search engine result page. So that can be things like the knowledge panel, the answer box, a video, kind of that list of suggested searches, etc. So all those elements that keep them on that search page instead of on your brand's content page. That also means content types like videos, infographics, blog posts, articles, anything like that, right? So what we really want to explore with our audit is the type of content that our audience finds, and when they're finding it, how are they actually going to interact with that individual piece of content? So findability is an ecosystem, and it really encompasses so many different things that we have to actually keep all of those elements in mind, regardless of whether or not we're solely responsible for SEO or solely responsible for online content. So here's an example. 60% of cable box owners are watching dual screens, which means they're actually watching TV with a phone, laptop, or tablet device in their hand or right next to them. That means if they see something interesting on TV, they're likely to go look for more information about it on things like Google, Facebook, YouTube, etc., or to share it. So that's an example of how your offline experiences with a brand or product impact the search quality that we're going to talk about during our audit process. And something you should keep in mind when you're looking at the types of audits that you can do and who might do them for you. Additionally, if we see something online through either advertisements, emails, social feeds, videos, etc., and then encounter it in a store or an offline environment, we're actually 90% more likely to engage with that product over other products, or with that service or brand over other services or brands. So as we can see, this ecosystem really feeds itself a lot in terms of this offline online push and pull. And so we have to be sure that when we're auditing our content, we're taking into account all of the aspects of the marketing ecosystem. So this brings us to, like, optimization is actually everywhere, right? We've got our on-site content, keywords, tags, meta, etc. We've got email, where we can actually use our audit information such as keyword targeting and different types of content for subject lines, headers, and content to be driven to from our email. Same thing with social media posts. We can use our keyword targeting for better topics, better hashtag choices, as well as the content that we may link to from a post. In paid ads, we want to make sure that the headlines and the content and the copy that we're using in our paid ads is what's reflected in how search is happening natively for our site. So we'll touch on that a little bit in terms of audits too. And then for offsite content, we want to look at our linking strategy for our offsite content, use of non-traditional search engines, whether that's something like an Amazon, a Jet, a Target, a Walmart, or a non-traditional search engine like a Pinterest or a YouTube. So all of these are really things to think about. So when we talk about something with regards to audits, one of the things I like to tell people to keep in mind is that audits should both engage and uncover details for your current audience and that content, as well as your target audience. So what does that mean? Your current audience is made up of the people who are engaging successfully or otherwise with your brand, products, services, and content. Now, contrast that with what your target audience is, and that's made up of anybody who is searching for, needs, or wants your offerings, whether you have identified them or not. Now, the good news is your target audience is always bigger than your current audience, which means you could be selling more or garnering more traffic, etc. So because of that information, when we look at an audit, we want to make sure that when we're auditing our content, we're not just looking at and it depends again on the type of audit that you're doing. So sometimes the audit is just looking at kind of current audience engagement. But what we really also want to find out is what that other piece of the target audience is and how we can pull them in. So kind of how we find our target audience is made up of a variety of different things, right? We've got our on-site content, we've got search, we've got social, we've got off-site content, and we've got offline things. So for today's purposes and for the purposes of our series on audits, we're specifically going to talk a little bit about search, and some things that we talk about considering at DemandSphere are what people are searching for and what leads them to your content. What is your content targeted to for topics and keywords already? How findable is the content now? And does your content actually match what you think your audience is? What type of content is found most frequently for target searches, right? So again, back to this content typing idea, which is, are you included in universal search elements? Do you have knowledge panel or answer box content, or do your videos outperform slide shares or blog posts, things like that? How are the search terms and keywords changing for your audience, and how do SERP and universal search elements change audience engagement with your brand over time and on different devices, right? So how does mobile search impact audience engagement? How does the universal search elements on mobile SERPs change versus desktop SERPs, and what does that look like for your brand's experience? And how can you actually create content that will target those things? And are your keywords and topics part of your findability and marketing ecosystem beyond SEO? So if we're going to spend time doing this audit and we're going to like really dig in and look at stuff, what does that actually look like for sharing it beyond that ecosystem? So all of these things are kind of considerations to really think about as we move through the audit process, because the audit can be such a huge tool and benefit to your business. Again, we're talking about like, what can an audit do for your business? Ideally, if you're investing in a bigger audit, or what we would call later a strategic or full service audit that will cover these kinds of things, are going to be a part of the deliverables that you'll receive. So how do we start to understand the target audience? Outside of what I just mentioned, there are 5 things that I think you have to understand no matter what, whether you do an audit or whether you're just thinking about what to do for your business. The first thing is how are people finding us and our competitors currently? Not just how are they finding you, how are they finding anything that solves the need or want that they have? So if somebody's looking for something, how are they finding it? And then what are they finding, right? So number 2 is, what content are they finding and what kind of content is it? Next, who are they that happen to be searching for this, and are they the right people? And what I mean by are they the right people is the thing that they're searching for and what we provide congruous, right? So ideally, they wouldn't find you if you weren't the right provider of either informations, products, or services. But there have been times that folks will create a lot of content around a specific adjacent area or a specific how-to, but the product or service that they offer is actually not necessarily serving the specific market that happens to be looking, right? And there can be good and bad parts to that. And an audit should help you uncover that, as should a good strategist. And the last thing is, are they happy with what they're finding? And this is the part that I think a lot of folks kind of drop off on, right? So we'll focus on how people are finding us and what they're finding, and maybe audience analysis of who they are, and our own determination of whether or not they're the right people, whether that's right or wrong. But we don't think about whether or not they're actually happy with what they're finding, because we've done our job, right? We've driven our traffic, or we've given sales some leads, but we should care about whether or not they're happy with what they're finding, because I mean, the most simple SEO version of this is bounce rate, right? But beyond bounce rate, it's, are they using the content that they're finding from you because it's the only content out there and you're in a low competition area? Sometimes people think that that's a blessing to just be in this low competition state of marketing, where they're like, oh, well, we don't have a lot of other things, so our content is the only content being consumed. That'll only last for so long. You'll end up with competitors, but you'll also end up with an audience of people who still aren't being served as well as they could be served. And we want to make sure that we're seeking to better that engagement with our audience, not just to build repeat business, but to build happy repeat business. That way, if a competitor does come on the market, they're fully entrenched with us. And as business people and service providers, we should want them to be happy with what we're doing anyway, right? So kind of a great starting point to do that, again, is doing these site audits. So the business value of this, when we talked about providing a to-do list of tasks to improve your ranking and traffic, spot errors and issues before they start to impact conversions and revenue, and prioritizing the tasks to tackle first, this is paramount to like getting onto, like, from this audit, you actually have to have deliverables, right? So everything I just talked about is aspirational and lovely, but the problem is, a lot of times we'll talk about it, but we won't get this to-do list and this actual timeline and a project plan for laying it out. So when we talk at the end about a checklist, which we will provide you to use, you'll get a checklist of the actual things that you should be checking for by each audit type for, hey, I want to make sure that if you're going to provide me all of this information, that I get a timeline. Or if you don't need the timeline and you can do it yourself, some other type of audit may be good for you. But we should set our expectations reasonably about the tool or vendor that we're going to work with for the audit, or if we're doing the audit internally ourselves, making sure that we're really set up for success, and setting expectations with our teams. So with issues and errors, again, like where you start and what's most important, what you can tackle yourself versus outsource to other things. Like some of the things that you'll find from an issue and error standpoint are things like overall crawlability, right? Like, is your content actually findable? People, I think a lot of times forget about materials that they have that are like maybe PDF'd, or image based, or they'll post videos that are offsite to their content. And so when we're actually looking at kind of like the content holistic ecosystem, they'll forget about the crawlability of certain types of things like PDFs and images. And so that's important to double check on. We actually have a whole video on video SEO specifically, and I'll make sure that I link to that. And we'd love to actually update that, because when we did that episode, it was actually a couple of years ago, and that stuff always changes. Other things that you'll find from an issue and error perspective may be things like page structure, keyword targeting issues, UX and UI problems, and your overall linking strategy. So there's a bunch of different types of issue and error things that may be brought to light, and somebody should be categorizing these, or you should categorize them, whether you use these categories or something else, so that you can kind of better understand the ecosystem or the lay of the land, right? So if what you're finding is you've actually got like very basic crawlability problems, that is probably going to be your number one like place to start, right? So your content's not being crawled, none of the rest of this stuff even matters, until that issue is resolved. page structure and keyword targeting, you may end up saying like, hey, these issues need to be fixed before I can move on to where our linking strategy is, et cetera. So let's talk a little bit about the types of audits. And I know that this slide has a lot of text on it, but I think that having things in kind of a grid layout is really helpful. So, and we're going to dive into each of these over the next couple of weeks of episodes. This will be the list of things that we come back to on a regular basis. So you'll notice here that we've got these 8 types of audits, and we've got like a little bit of a timeline and a cost. I'd like to make a caveat here, and I'll mention it every week. These are generalizations for these types of audits, but depending on your site size or your specific needs, these things, such as the timeline and the cost, may change. But let's dive into what a little bit of each of these are, right? So automated SEO or URL checkers. What do these do? These scan your site for either or just a single URL for obvious errors. There's little to no human review of any of this. In fact, I'm going to say there's not little human review. There is usually no human review of this. The timeline is minimal. This may be done in a matter of minutes or hours. The cost is usually super low. Sometimes it's even free. Again, this is going to spit out some like really basic errors that you might find on your site. Then we've got actual SEO analysis tools. So SEO analysis tools are going to be a little bit deeper usually than kind of just like an automated URL checker. An SEO analysis tool will typically scan your entire site or a chosen subdomain or folder. They can also scan, depending on the type of SEO tool you choose, they can also scan offsite content. Most SEO analysis tools will also provide some deeper insights into your errors and your prioritization. So Demand Sphere's demand metrics platform is like a really good example of an SEO tool like this that has like a site health functionality. Another thing that it does in there is it does some like competitor discovery, competitor rank analysis, and monitoring and things like that. So if you're looking at something like this, your SEO analysis tools may be purely audit function for the time being, but a lot of times they could provide other services, and that depends on how up the enterprise model you go. SEO analysis tools typically can also involve some sort of like daily, weekly, monthly, or quarterly reporting options, and it depends on how long you'd like to engage with that tool. Our recommendation is that if you're going to invest in something like this, audits are not a one-time thing, which is what we're going to talk about when we talk about frequency next week. So an SEO tool like this will often be used in conjunction with other audit types. So you may use a tool to keep an eye on the progress, the KPIs, ongoing error and issue reporting and alerting, in addition to some bigger audits that you do. So you may do a larger audit once every 1 to 2 years with shorter specialized or mini audits, and then keep an eye on stuff with your SEO analysis tool, like for example. So what's a mini audit? This is a really great tool for quickly gauging your site's overall health. You don't have to do a super deep dive, and you don't need to have like a really huge team taking a look at this. The budget is usually more minimal, but what it is going to tell you is a general overview of how your site's performing, how your content's performing, and kind of where you're at, right? So it's your sort of site health litmus test. And it can be a lot of times the first step as a longer term SEO strategy. So a lot of times this is a good way to dip a toe in the water if you or your organization isn't sure about what an audit can provide. So what is a hybrid audit? A hybrid audit includes both a kind of a more technical scan of your tool that you would continue to have access to. So this is what I was talking about earlier, which is you may have access to an SEO analysis tool, as well as the strategic insights and reporting and cross-functional auditing. So like, let's say you need an e-commerce audit, and then you also want to have access to a specific tool to keep an eye on things on a regular basis. These hybrid programs, so sometimes you have to build the hybrid yourself. or an agency can build it for you. DemandSphere offers hybrid solutions because we have our own platform and we have a managed services team, but it's something to ask about if you also have an internal team who would benefit from having regular access to insights and reporting in addition to the audit deliverables themselves. A specialized audit is really good for specific needs, like this e-commerce migration. So like, let's say we're migrating from like Magento to Shopify or, doing something like that. They're also really good for emergency situations. So if you've noticed a huge ranking decrease or something like a Google red flag penalty has come up, your specialized audit is going to be the kind of thing that is going to jump in and quickly address or assess that specific need. Again, a lot of these things, as I mentioned, the cost and the timeline can be really dependent on stuff. So these emergency situations, while the fix may not be huge or the digging around may not be very expensive, depending on what kind of solution you're looking for or mitigation of the issue, you may be paying kind of a rush fee, right? So that depends again on who's helping you do it. So when we discuss who can help you do these audits and who the best partners are, whether it's your in-house team, whether it's you alone, whether it's an agency or a contractor or a service provider, we'll dig into like what that looks like. Element audits are kind of more specific solution provider checks for a very specific SEO element. Things like title and metadata, alt tags, your backlinks, anchor text, etc. Element specific audits are probably one of the lesser frequented types of audits that we do. Our last two things are a little bit similar, and I'll try to make the distinction because I think it's easy to get them confused. Strategic SEO audits is when a solution provider, typically either like a strategy team, an agency, etc., and they may use a tool or not use a tool, will actually put together a report for you. They're probably going to do a lot of that analysis and deeper competitor dives and recommendations, project plans, etc., across all of your SEO elements. The strategic SEO audit and the full service SEO audit are typically the places where you're going to get a lot of what I was discussing automatically, right? Without asking for extras. It doesn't mean you shouldn't go through the checklist that we'll provide in our fourth week, but it means that they're already ready to provide the majority of those services that we've discussed, right? They're going to be putting together the timeline. They're going to look at the interdependencies of the recommendations. They're going to look at your marketplace and your competitor. They're going to probably do some keyword research and dig around in there, right? Your full service audit, what's different here is the strategic SEO audit is probably going to provide you this project plan and give you the report. The full service audit will actually help you carry out the recommendations in tandem with your team. And this is a longer term relationship. They may be a long-term part of monitoring your SEO health, like, and your overall content strategy. So our team here, for example, will do anything from these kind of more one-time audits and mini audits to becoming kind of an extension or an arm of someone's team where, we provide a monthly health check and ongoing we'll dive in and either update content or create content or fix errors that we find. This is typically more of an agency or in-house function because of the longer term nature of things, but there are extended full service audits that are done one time, and people will do them once a year, once every 2 to 3 years. I don't know that you necessarily need a full service audit if nothing major has changed more than once every couple of years, unless you are, again, going to do that kind of more long-term thing. So let's kind of recap where we're at before we close off, because we do try to keep the show to 30 minutes every time. How long audits take? So on the self-serve end of things, all the way to the full strategic, like account management review, what we're looking at minutes to hours is going to be those automated checkers and SEO analysis tools, right? They're self-serve. You're going to get this information back, and it is up to you to kind of determine what the priorities are, make those determinations yourself. Mini audits are going to be usually probably a few days to a week or so, give you some ideas and things, may or may not include a ton of prioritization, but will kind of help you dip your toe in the water of what search and your overall site health looks like. Your hybrid, your specialized, your element things, those are typically going to take a little bit longer, and it really depends a lot on your site size and what you need in terms of follow-up from that, right? Like, do you need a project plan? Do you need help with implementation? That's kind of moving this way. Again, these are generalizations, and any of this could be impacted by your list of desired deliverables or site size. Lastly, the strategic audits, again, we're like into the weeks usually, and that's because somebody's hopefully digging into competitor analysis, keyword research, individual page level errors. So like if your site has tens of thousands or millions of pages, especially when you get into these bigger e-commerce sites and somebody's analyzing all of your pages and taking a look at that, that can take a while to do. And then full service, obviously, that depends on the length of time that you'd like to actually work with someone. So that is kind of our 101 an overview for where we're at today. Next week, when we jump in, we're going to actually break down each of those audit types, and we're going to look at kind of a cross section of what deliverables should be included with each of those. And we'll talk a little bit about what deliverables may end up looking like. Again, I'm Erin Atchison. This is presented by DemandSphere. You can see my email here is erin@demandsphere.com if you have questions or need anything from us. And then we will look forward to seeing you guys next week. Our email follow-up from the show always includes various resources. So you'll end up getting things like the charts from today's that break down the type of audits and things like that. And then they're all going to be wrapped up in a resource guide at the conclusion of our 4-week series. So we look forward to seeing you again next week, and we'll talk to you then.